is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners in cooperation with Prophecy DeFi. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. My name is Alex Tapscott, here with co-host Andrew Young. Today, we are sitting down with Dean Tribble, the CEO of Agoric, the JavaScript-native smart contracting platform, to discuss how his team is designing systems to bring JavaScript developers into the fabric of DeFi. Agoric is designed to enable developers to rapidly build safe, smart contracts in what is the most popular programming language on the planet. And before we did this, I just looked up the numbers. By most estimates, there are around 13 to 14 million JavaScript developers, representing more than half of all active developers worldwide. And so far, there has not been a blockchain that has been, tailor-made or designed for people who work in that programming language. So I think we're going to be quite interested to hear from Dean just exactly how he thinks his platform can help unleash, a new era of growth by bringing on all these new kinds of developers. Last week, Agoric also announced the closing of its public token sale, selling over $50 million of its BLD tokens in less than 2 hours. That follows on a private sale that happened earlier with some large, notable crypto VC backers. What's unique too is that the Agoric team has been deeply involved in the development of smart contracts even before the time of Bitcoin or blockchain, which might surprise people to know that even existed. From initial discussions in the 90s, all the way to Brian Warner, a co-founder's involvement in the prescient least authority security audit of Ethereum. It's a bit of a mouthful. We'll get into that. All right, so Dean, let's talk about this. You're a layer one blockchain. We've talked about the layer one thesis on this podcast at length. So what's different exactly about Agoric?
As you noted, the biggest difference is it's designed to be programmable in JavaScript. So, the hardest thing to scale in blockchain is the programmability. The hardest thing to scale is the number of programmers who can build in this stuff. And it's essential that we get to where mainstream developers feel comfortable picking this up as a tool and being able to build, where they could choose to build a centralized application, they could easily choose to build a decentralized application. And that's really been a big chunk of our focus is scaling that programmability.
Interesting. And we mentioned at the top 13.8 million JavaScript developers. Yeah. Not all of them are going to, jump on the blockchain DeFi bandwagon right away. Do you have any estimate if there, how many people are being, held back by the fact that there isn't a way for them to easily program things in this language?
Yeah, so I have lots of anecdotal information, but I don't have numbers for you. But my previous gig to this was a multi-billion-dollar payment instrument, normal CeFi, built, using various tools. And lots and lots of fintech developers are entrepreneurial. They're really smart. They have things that they want to build. And just looking at the people that worked for me at the time, they look at blockchain, they look at what's there, they go, yeah, not really ready. It's kind of, the development environments are terrible. These languages are weird. I'm going to go, work for my buddy's hedge fund instead. So they've got opportunities in front of them such that they don't need to do the deep dive to learn yet another programming language, especially one that's kind of strange, right? In order to do their next gig. And so they want to do blockchain, they're interested, and they just look and go, yeah, I'll come back when it's a little more mature.
Yeah, that's one of the critiques of Ethereum is that they have their own programming language Solidity. And, there are, because of just how cool it is to develop these kinds of applications, the number of Solidity developers is in the hundreds of thousands, but they had to start from a basis of zero because everyone needed to become familiar with that. So this creates, I guess, a path of least resistance for people to do this.
The number of good Ethereum developers is more like tens of thousands, right? It's not, there's no estimate of deep, ability to build an interesting DeFi protocol that's in the hundreds of thousands of developers.
So you mentioned that prior to this, you were doing something in the fintech space that, was more conventional. Well, what caused you to make the leap into this, the world of crypto?
In some sense, for me, it's a leap back, right? I worked on the first production smart contract back in 1988. So, was one of the early cypherpunks and had done, worked on cyber digital cash and things like that. In the 90s, we had a big project with Sun Microsystems Laboratories to do smart contracts for controlling computational resources like, network bandwidth and processor cycles and memory, and auctioning off, access to internal compute resources and that sort of thing. And so we'd done this stuff before. And what brought me back into the world of, platforms for smart contracts, if you will, but brought me into the world of blockchain, was a panel that, in 2017, there was all these horrible security exploits. There'd be a reentrancy bug, which is the thing, this is, you mentioned earlier, Brian Warner and the prescient security review. Least Authority did this security review of Ethereum, and they pointed out, oh, you have reentrancy. That's a problem. I know it's simpler to do toy examples, but complex systems, are going to kill you here. And so 2017, you saw, the first of these reentrancy bugs, and, 3 months ago, you saw a $660 million reentrancy bug. But so at that point, there would be smart contracts written by the experts, and they'd have a security bug that lost them $30 million. So they would roll out a fix and they'd lose another $30 million. It's like, if they can't get it right, what chance do a million developers have to get it right? And, my perspective is there's a wall there, and the answer is pretty much none, right? That what'll happen is we get some important set of contracts that are developed, that are battle tested, that people lose money and fix it, but gradually get to the point where, okay, these, we can rely on the same way we had a bunch of programs that we could rely on in assembly language, right? And that's what will continue to have vast amounts of value in Ethereum. But that's not sufficiently programmable for the mainstream universe of programmers to get onto. So we saw this problem. People brought together a panel of, Brian Warner and Mark Miller, our chief scientist, and Zuko from Zcash, and Arthur from Tezos, and Jorge from Gravity, and had this discussion, this panel about, does the security model that, the extended team of Agoric that, we'd come up with years and years before and used in a bunch of different mainstream stuff, would that security model help for smart contracts? And the answer was yes. And so we, everyone sort of got together and started this company.
Well, it's interesting. Okay, there's a lot that I want to unpack there.
Yeah, sorry.
It might surprise some people to learn that there was a thing called a smart contract in 1988. Weren't people still listening to 8 tracks in 1988? In 1988, that's longer ago than Andrew's been alive, for God's sake.
Yeah, it was 5 years before Vitalik, or 89, I think. Yeah, 5 years before Vitalik.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we've talked about DeFi applications and Web3 applications, and this concept of a smart contract. But basically, this idea that there's a piece of computer code that can mimic the logic of a business agreement with self-executing terms involving the transfer of value. That's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is that there's a
I have a simpler mouthful.
Yeah, you probably have a better definition, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. But the transfer of value part is interesting because in order, if you think about a decentralized exchange or lending pool, there's a scarce digital good there that is enabled by blockchain, whether it's the native token or it's the collateral that's a stable coin or something, right? So maybe there's a different definition of a smart contract that doesn't involve a crypto native asset, because that's the thing that I think of as a smart contract includes the transfer or storage or manipulation of a crypto asset. Is that incorrect, or do you have
yes, but it doesn't need blockchain for that. So my simpler definition is and I like elements of your definition, but it is software that implements a contract-like arrangement between third parties where the software enforces the terms of the contract.
Yeah, exactly.
Right now, transfer is usually implicit in that, but it's terms of a contract-like arrangement that enforces the terms of that contract. Now, so we had, around 2015, Mark Miller, our chief scientist, published a paper at the cryptography conference, whose name was Financial Cryptography, showing how to do an escrow agent in pure JavaScript, nothing to do with blockchain, right? And that was right around the time and then Vitalik published, here's Ethereum, but all of the smart contracts that predate blockchain, and they're, this is again 1988, were smart contracts, again, this arrangement of software enforcing the terms of a contract like arrangement. eBay, PayPal, Venmo, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, Amazon, high frequency trading. Those are all software where no human gets involved in 9,999 of the 10,000 auctions that happen on eBay. It all happened because of software. It chose to do the payment. It set up the transfer. It arranged the confirmation. It did the prioritization of bidding, and et cetera.
Interesting. But then again, there's still an institution there that can act as a mediator or whatever,
Absolutely.
It's still an intermediary.
Exactly.
In those so that's what blockchain. It's certainly a broader view, but I understand where you're getting at with this. Yeah.
I mean, the reason why it's important to have that particular view is partly, smart contracts were $1 trillion market cap before blockchain. What blockchain brings is not smart contracts, right? What blockchain brings is the high integrity execution of a smart contract. Bitcoin is a smart contract implemented in this way that doesn't require this trusted intermediary. And as a result, you can do things you could not do with smart contracts before that. But there's a lot of smart contracts where some of it will be on chain, some of it will be off chain. So it's important not to lose sight of, when we've worked with, brokerage houses and stuff like that, trying to think about smart contracts, figuring out that if you're not enforcing the terms of a contract like arrangement between third parties, you're leaving some value on the table. You're not actually using smart contracts in a way that brings its real power to bear. And so that's really useful. Similarly, if you're not getting the high integrity that can eliminate the trust on a central body or a central third party or a trusted intermediary, then you're not getting the value of blockchain. And so those are complementary things where the high integrity execution of, replicated computers all voting to agree on what happens such that no human or organization or government can suborn enough of those to compromise your execution. That lets you get rid of the trusted intermediary. And that's what gives you that's why, all these people worry about everything about blockchain, but clearly there's fundamentally core value there that really can change the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, shifting focus though to Agoric. I want to talk a little bit more about the sort of design of the chain, because reading through the white paper, it was very unique. I saw that there was actually 2 different tokens.
Yes.
There's actually a protocol stablecoin called Run, and then which is actually used to pay for gas costs.
Exactly.
And things like that, which is very unique. And then you have a separate sort of currency, which is BLD, which is sort of the staking, the more traditional sort of token used to secure the network. I'm kind of curious why you chose to sort of split the functionality of the blockchain token, I guess, into 2, and kind of curious to hear more about sort of how it's designed and sort of why it's designed that way.
Sure. Yeah. So, and we run using proof of stake. So the battle tested Tendermint that comes out of Cosmos. And so, we're a proof of stake chain where build is the staking token, as you said. So there are several fundamental issues that we see in existing blockchain that interfere with the growth of a rich economy. What does it take to not just rapidly build, so not just build fast, build applications in JavaScript, and there's a sort of the toolkit that we can talk about around there, but also to be able to deploy and get into business fast. And a key element of economies is they all have a stable, currency-like thing that has a stable value that mostly is not intended to go up and down, that provides the grease for commerce, right? It means that I can tell whether my rent went up because it's priced the same today as it was yesterday, right? I can tell whether, I should travel versus get teleconferencing because the price of those vary with each other because they're priced in the same way, right? Ignoring COVID. So that's a critical element of any rich economy. Now you can get away without it for a while, but it's sort of, great. Barter economies worked for 1,000 years, right? But money economies work better, right? And they scale better and they do better. Okay, so there's a couple of elements in something like Ethereum where if you think of gas prices as your rent or your postage, it's sort of the equivalent of paying Apple shares for your rent. You can do it, right? As long as you come to an arrangement with your landlord, right? But it's not efficient. It's not great. It's not, it's not the way economies work for a reason, because just sort of sand in the gears of richer and richer examples. I mean, yes, there's a lot of smart contracts. Yes, there's, hundreds of billions of dollars of value there, but they're all actually pretty small compared to most of the software, or pretty simple compared to most of the software in the world. And that's partly because of the security hazards of the programming model that I sort of hinted at earlier, and partly because of these elements where, trying to do a mortgage that's going to be priced over years and years, you don't want to do that in a currency that might be worth twice as much or half as much next year, because then you have no idea how much you're paying for your house, right? And so that's a critical element of economy. The second element that, so it's a problem that these systems use a speculative token to pay for fundamental network services. The other problem is that they reward the miners or the validators based on that gas price, based on that rent for execution, right? And so, I mean, my Ethereum miners are the slumlords, for the chaotic Casbah that is their property, and the only thing they can do to extract value out of any burgeoning market that happens is raise the rents. Right. And we know that means that there are classes of businesses that simply can't get started. There are things that get started and then the rent gets raised out from under them, and now they're stretched really thin and eventually they break. And we just know that economically that's bad. But the problem is that's what the incentives are fundamentally in that chain. Is the only way they extract value is, well, MEV and raise the rent. And so that's not healthy. So part of the elements of our economy is you pay gas in the stable token, so you can tell whether it's more expensive today than yesterday. And that money does not go to the validators, does not go to the people operating the network. That run goes into the stability pool to help stabilize and grow the currency. And so now, and then the validators, the reward to them is fees from the economic services the chain is providing. So the primary one is, of course, fee for borrowing run to participate in there. That's just, a couple of basis points. It's very, very small, but that means that the bigger the economy, the more, the larger checks people are sending each other, the more economic activity happens, the more run is flowing around. So the more fee there is being very gently extracted from the run to reward the validators for operating an economy with a stable currency, right? And so now, instead of, so now they actually get rewarded for growing the economy. They actually get rewarded for doing things that allow more and more business to flourish, which is what you want everyone actively aligned to do, instead of getting rewarded for making sure there's more traffic on the roads and more people in your way, which is what the Ethereum model is, right? They get paid for transaction. Doesn't matter whether it's a 5-cent transaction or a $5 transaction. They get paid the same amount. So they'd be perfectly happy to extract more fees from transactions that no one valued.
So there's two things there. That's, first of all, that's very unique. I actually haven't seen any networks sort of designed like that. It's sort of, one kind of dumb way of thinking about it is it's almost as if like Maker DAO was like embedded deeply into Ethereum, and then DAI was used to pay for gas costs. Exactly. There's two things though that are kind of interesting. So first of all, it sounds like it's almost like miners and validators are motivated more by, I guess, kind of TVL of the chain versus sort of transactions.
Yes. Yep.
And then the second
I like
piece,
that.
Yeah. Which is interesting. And then the second piece is, how does I'm just trying to think of how, I guess, what emerges from this behavior of having sort of the gas fees go directly to this reserve fund? How is that fund sort of governed? Like what's sort of the control elements there, I guess?
That's a great question. That's some of the stuff that we're finishing some implementation on now. So, democracies are really important, and what I refer to as the builder DAO, right? The set of people that own build tokens are, at the end of the day, the authority about what happens on the chain. They decide, right? But they're not as good at getting things done, right? And I did a pluggable governance presentation where I quoted someone who had a Twitter stream, and maybe I'll pull that out to point you at later. But companies get things done not by having shareholder votes, but by having an executive team that is tasked with getting stuff done, and then the executive team is paid by and accountable to that DAO of holders, right? And so we sort of believe in we believe in fairly rich, flexible, pluggable governance. We'll be doing a relatively little bit of what our system will enable in the future, but having a working group whose job is to make sure Run is economically stable and sound, such that it can grow as a useful, stable token in not just the Agoric chain, but the extended interchain network connected with IBC and other interop protocols. And so their job will be to get things done. So they will have limited control directly over, the parameters, like the governance board of Maker, that they adjust the parameters for Run. And then they make proposals to be voted on and approved by the builder DAO to say, yes, we want to add this other currency, or yes, we want to change how liquidation works to make it rate limited because that makes it work better, smoother in arbitrage, or whatever it is, right? They're experts in that area. And so they would end up having, more direct, proposal authority over what happens to those the execution fees. But the reserve is fundamentally exactly protocol controlled value that is intended to be a big pool that backstops the stability of the Run token, so that you can really count on it as being, as being stable. Now, we don't actually, for our purposes, require that it be pegged to $1. That's an economic convenience for the vast number of businesses out there that can deal with that from an accounting point of view. What's important is that you're able to compare your price of execution from today to yesterday, or compare other services on the network from one day to the next. And you have something so that there's no reason for businesses to price on running on chain to do foreign exchange to figure out whether, well, if I took Quatlus instead of simoleons, then it's priced differently. And, and just having everything in terms of Run should, it greases the wheels of commerce is the goal.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think, sorry, Alex, real quick. That makes a ton of sense. I guess my question is because I noticed it's also not hard pegged to the US dollar. I guess, how does it maintain its stability in the face of increasing demand or?
Right. Good. So the fundamental thing is, indeed, you mentioned MakerDAO. The Vault Factory is the primary source of Run, which is exactly a CDP style implementation that uses an Oracle network that we're working with various folks that come out of so it'll be a sibling to the Chainlink Oracle network, using a lot of the same Chainlink node operators and elements of that architecture. And so that'll be the Oracle network into Agoric. As Sergey of Chainlink talked about, we'll launch as an information-rich, pluggable smart contract world. So, oracles are just another DeFi Lego that you can plug in. We will use that technology so that we will be able to watch the dollar-based prices of assets and liquidate them when they fall below the required collateralization levels.
So this is we could talk at length about the structure and governance of the network. Let's talk about what your goals are in terms of driving adoption. So we've talked before about different layer ones. Our view on this podcast is that there is no Ethereum killer per se, that block space is an asset that will be in demand for some time, and people will be looking for creative solutions that are well suited to what they're trying to do. This strikes me as an example of that. And I'm wondering what exactly, what is, right now you're at the launch phase, but what do you expect to be the biggest drivers of demand or growth for your platform in the coming, let's say, 1 or 2 years?
Right. So there are two phases. We have multiple phases of rolling out our mainnet, and we're already at mainnet 0, which is the consensus layer laid down and the validator set taking form and people starting to get the staking up. But there are two major phases of release for our platform and a couple in the middle. The first is the launch of these key economic contracts that we built, that the community will then select among and launch as sort of the starting point for the economy. So this is the Run protocol launch, or mainnet 1. And that was always in the books, but it has burgeoned into a much larger thing than we had originally anticipated, and we're really excited about it. And the reason is because we worked on IBC, the Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol, that enables multiple, especially Cosmos chains, but it's more general than that, multiple chains to interoperate with each other and transfer assets around. And so we launched not as an isolated chain with no connectivity to any other place, but we were some of the earliest driving interoperability. So we launched connected to $75 billion in digital assets on other chains available to us via IBC. And that's this really rich ecosystem that does not have a stable token. Right, that does not have a stable token that can be based on the assets in that chain. And so the Run protocol, turns out those people, the folks at Cosmos, at Osmosis, at Injective, at Axelar, all these places, they're hungry for a stable token that can be based on those assets in that ecosystem. And Run will start life that way. And so that Run protocol launch is, there's already nascent demand that wants what we're going to be producing. So we're excited about that launch. We think it's going to be huge. And that will roll out, because of demand for Run, not directly on the Agoric chain, but on these other chains where they can bring Atom over, get a vault, borrow Run against it, take the Run over to Osmo and put it in a pool there, or take it to Evmos, which is an EVM chain for Cosmos, and stick it in a Curve pool that's trading Run and DAI and UST or whatever it is, right? And so there's all these opportunities for it at our very first, just from our first launch. Okay, and that's a particular style of go-to-market that's very, very focused on that. But that really enables our chain. So the second important phase, is mainnet 3. So that's a couple stages down, which is the permissionless ability for anybody to deploy smart contracts in JavaScript. And there, I think it starts with, here's a bunch of assets. Here's a stablecoin machine with hooks for extensibility by third parties, right? Things to reduce the required over collateralization, because you can plug in a smart contract that provides you a hedge, or things to provide better, faster, smoother liquidation options. Because one of the key differences from MakerDAO, it's sort of like MakerDAO embedded in the system, but the token is used for execution, and so it's got sort of a direct native market, and everyone on chain must use it. Whereas on Ethereum, that's not the case. Or every smart contract on chain, has to use it, so they might as well. And the other is that we're an asynchronous active chain, so the Vault Factory can wake up, notice the prices change, get signaled by the Oracle that the prices change, and go actively or proactively liquidate on the AMM, on the native automated market maker. And so that means we don't need outside auctions, we don't need outside connectivity to be able to have a continuous functioning economy with liquidations. But that's one strategy. You could do rate limit on the AMM. You could do liquidations out over IBC to these AMM pools that are on other chains that might have deeper liquidity in some particular token. And so it's one of these things where once you've got a little bit of business revolving around a lot of money, it's really easy to see how people can incrementally build new DeFi to leverage it, enhance it, and get their own little piece of that active economic pie, and then it grows very quickly into a flourishing economy. And so phase 3 really is anyone can upload very small JavaScript contracts that are in business.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I didn't fully appreciate how interconnected this was into the IBC universe. We've had Sunny on the podcast. We've had Ethan on the podcast. We've had Peng Zhang from Tendermint on the podcast. Yep. We've had, we're
all people I've talked to in the last couple of weeks. Yes.
Well, we're pretty familiar with it, and it's interesting. We're multi-chain maximalists, and it sounds like your whole the whole strategy by design is to connect into these established pools of capital and developers and everything else, which is so fascinating. So we're in the last sort of few minutes here of our time, but we could keep talking here for a while. But I'm just wondering, what does success look like for you if we're sitting down in exactly 1 year's time? You mentioned this roadmap, but are there any certain metrics that you are looking at? I would guess that in addition to all of the things you've mentioned, driving regular mainstream JavaScript developers into blockchain strikes me as the kind of big goal here, right? That's going to benefit your platform and its tokens, obviously, but it's also strikes me as like a bigger mission or the point. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is that how you think about it as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the Run protocol launch is huge. That's sort of imminent. But the real goal, and the thing that's been driving us for literally decades from when we first did this stuff, is smart contracts, is having software that enables strangers to cooperate in ways they couldn't before, leads to a more cooperative world. That's always been the goal, and so we're not an Ethereum killer because Ethereum is awesome. It cracked open the programmable smart contracts on a blockchain, and it's going to be here for a long time. We want to build off of that. We want to leverage that, but we're unique in our ability to get out to a new class of developers. Now, I do want to point out something that's important, is it's not just that it's about JavaScript. Because, JavaScript was experts were building cool applications in JavaScript, for a long time, and we helped evolve that, right? We were in the JavaScript standards committee building that along, but then React and Vue and Angular and those frameworks came out where 6 months later, a beginning JavaScript programmer could pull together components built by multiple other people and assemble a more responsive, more interactive, more mobile friendly, easier to internationalize, interactive application in JavaScript than an expert could have done a year before. And that's the big change. So it's not just that we're JavaScript, but we are JavaScript with a framework like a React, where React is optimized and specialized for mouse clicks and rendering. We're one that's optimized and specialized for digital assets and transactions and transfer in a simple JavaScript-like framework. And so you need to learn the framework, not just JavaScript, but JavaScript developers are used to that. And it's a framework that looks familiar, where I've just got, here's the JavaScript function I want to invoke when a new bidder comes to my auction. And here's the function to invoke when the auction's over. And I guess in JavaScript, it just takes the array of offers, sorts them, picks the top one, I'm done, right? And so that's the change that will enable millions of developers to be able to program this stuff, is not just the language there and the tools they're familiar with, but also the programming style and framework kind of thing that has really shown exponential leverage and exponential growth for developer capacity.
I love that. Well, this has been a really terrific conversation. Dean, we'll have to have you back on, when the time comes. I certainly have learned a lot on this call, and I enjoyed the discussion with you and Andrew as well, and some of the more technical components here. So we wish you the best of luck with everything that you have planned. And congrats on everything that you've done to date. It's been a real ride, obviously, so far. And we support your mission, and we think it's a worthy one. So thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. All right, take care.
Thank you all so much.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.